It's not easy to follow up on games that become a gigantic success with making the sequel just as successful, but many have tried, including Nintendo. Breath of the Wild hit the Wii U and Switch back in 2017 and became this huge thing. Skyrim, but Zelda. An example of what could be possible with huge scale games on a handheld console, despite no other open world games that I can think of on the Switch quite matching what that 2017 game did. So, how does this sequel turn out, and is it worth the extra $10 on the price tag that over 10 million people paid for in the first 3 days? Let's find out. Here is my review of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom for the Nintendo Switch. When it comes to story, and I'm going to keep this as spoiler free as possible, this game is set sometime after Breath of the Wild. Link and Princess Zelda are exploring the cave system underneath Hyrule Castle when they awaken something that severely injures Link and sends Zelda off who knows where. Link awakens later on floating islands high above the kingdom and sets out on a new adventure to find the princess and stop this new evil threat. In terms of story, I like what they did here, but I didn't love it. There are some legitimately great advancements with the character development of some people like Prince Sidon and Riju, and there are a ton of similarities and nods to older Zelda games, especially using concepts that started in entries like Skyward Sword and Ocarina of Time. But what makes this good and not amazing is the long list of questions that never got answered. Leaving things ambiguous isn't necessarily a bad thing, and this is just a personal me thing, but I was hoping to get some information on how this new threat was tied or different from the Calamity. Tears didn't really give us much, at least in the questions that I had. When it comes to gameplay, this is a third-person open-world action-adventure game, very much like its predecessor. You explore huge 3D open-world maps as you visit villages, solve puzzles, finish quests, and fight enemies in real-time combat. Now, first of all, they took the scale of Breath of the Wild, which was already massive, and multiplied it with not only the original map coming back with story changes, but the Sky Islands in the area above and the underground depths that is an entirely new map the same size as the normal ground level map. And in a most impressive moment, you can transition between all three of these elevations seamlessly without loading screens. You jump off of a Sky Island and suddenly you're just there on the normal map. But let's move on to the game itself. A lot of progression will feel familiar as a lot of those old features did return. You have towers to visit to create the map, weapon durability is still a thing, you do shrines for health and stamina upgrades, Beetle still wanders the map as a vendor, and the list goes on. They even brought back all the old amiibo rewards so you can use that Ocarina of Time figure to still get the Hero of Time outfit and Big Goron sword. And yes, the date and time trick still works to let you change your Switch's date in system settings to keep using the same amiibo throughout a single day. But we also got new stuff, most notably rune replacements and traditional Zelda dungeons. Well, sort of. The dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom are elemental temples, but they don't work as enclosed areas where you have to find small keys, a key item, and then a boss key. There's one in each region you visit with a story NPC, and each dungeon has the boss room at the beginning, with you having to traverse the dungeon to activate 5 mechanisms to unlock said boss. It's kind of a mix between traditional dungeons and what Breath of the Wild did with the Divine Beasts. And then are the abilities, the replacements for Breath of the Wild's runes. You get all new interactability. You can snap items together and create vehicles like you're playing Banjo and Kazooie nuts and bolts, rewind time on objects to move them back to where they used to be, and being able to jump into ceilings, phasing through them into the areas above. And this goes more into the idea of you can do whatever you want in this game. These abilities are really just cheat codes that you can use to break the system. This is especially true for Ultra Hand and Time Rewind, as it effectively lets you circumvent almost every puzzle in the game. Why create an elaborate vehicle to cross a huge gap when you can just hover an object near the ledge and use Rewind to ride it across and jump over? There are a few exceptions, but I very rarely solved puzzles the intended way instead of just using Ultra Hand to skip it. This comes together for an incredibly fun adventure. You can do exploration for hours on end, create contraptions and vehicles with Ultra Hand just for the fun of it, and most important of all, you can still grab Link's favorite traveling companion, the Hyrule Castle bookshelf, and take it on new adventures across Hyrule on land and in the air. But I will admit about difficulty. Breath of the Wild was a pretty hard game, especially at first with how much damage everything did to Link, and Tears of the Kingdom really escalates this. Almost everything early on and in Dungeons 2 onward can pretty much one-shot you if you aren't doing good on upgrades both for armor and heart containers. This is a really big dodge and counter game, with some fights in the late game heavily relying on that perfect dodge counterattack function. It's not absolutely required, there are ways to cheese even the final boss, but many enemies were clearly built around it. And that's about all I got for gameplay, so let's go into content and length. This game is $70 instead of $60, so you better get a lot out of it, right? You definitely will. My early time with the game was finishing the map, doing shrines to get upgrades for certain story-related equipment, and then just going through the main story. By the time I'd gotten through the final boss without doing more than 1 or 2 of the game's many side quests and never visiting a lot of areas on the map, I'd been playing for around 50 hours. If you want to be more specific, my first 20 hours was creating the map, doing stamina upgrades, and getting a certain story item way earlier than you should have been able to by using all of the new abilities to circumvent the game's rules. This is too high up to realistically go early in the game and therefore you can't do it? Well, guess what? You gave me the tools to let me go up there even if it takes all of my patience to do it. Now let's go into presentation. Not a whole lot is improved visually between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. There are some lighting things here and there, but you look at the renders side by side and they're pretty identical. But draw distance is something else. When you're in the sky, you can see landmarks, mountains, structures, and more miles and miles away from where Link is. It does have certain moving objects like dragons only show up at a certain distance, but you can see landmarks from so far away that it's crazy to think that this is a portable title. Performance is a bigger point of discussion though. The Day 1 patch fixed the vast majority of performance issues this game originally had, though there are still hiccups around in certain areas. You get drops into the 20s fairly often when using the Ultra Hand feature in busier areas and 2 specific rooms: the entrance to the Thunder Temple and the underground depths around the Spirit Temple. Overall though, it's pretty smooth for most of the game. And that's all I got for performance, so let's go into battery life. The original and light models get about 2 to 3.5 hours out of Tears of the Kingdom, and the V2 and OLED models get around 5 to 7 hours. Now in conclusion, Breath of the Wild's successor does exactly what it should. Make Breath of the Wild bigger, better, and most importantly, it gave us a million different ways to solve problems that are not the intended way. While I was disappointed in the lack of story context between the Calamity and New Threat, and there are still a fair number of performance hiccup areas, it's impressive that this game is on a handheld, especially with how much they increased the scale of the adventure. Given how other open world games are on the Switch, it seemingly shouldn't be possible for this to work, yet it does. Reviews to Go rates The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.